Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the second session of our third international workshop on mediation. Today's topic is mediating disputes and facilitating dialogue through the person-centered approach. I'm Francesca, and before starting, I would like to tell you a little bit about Mediate Guru, as some of you may be new here. So Mediate Guru is a social organization led by members from all around the world. Our aim is to bridge the gap between the general public and litigation, spreading awareness about mediation as the future. We have conducted various international webinars promoting mediation with speakers from all around the world so that you can add value to your legal career and legal studies. So without further ado, let me introduce you our esteemed guest, Mr. Rafael Tyszblat. He is an expert in conflict resolution, trainer in mediator, and dedicated most of his life in intercultural dialogue with 15 years of experience. He is the director of programming at the Muslim Jewish Conference, and recently he has also launched the initiative of Coalition of Civil Society Organization for dialogue through his organization, Connecting Actions. Based in Paris, he is also the innovation and design manager at Soliya. I would like to welcome Mr. Rafael. It's a great opportunity to have you with us today. And for this reason, I encourage you all to ask your questions in the chat box below. We would like to make this session as much interactive as possible, so feel free to ask any doubts, any queries. And remember that the feedback form will be sent at the end. So over to you, Rafael.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. I am very happy to give this presentation. So, like you said, I'm going to talk about the person-centered approach mediation, and the person-centered approach is an approach practiced and conceptualized by Carl Rogers, who was an American therapist. He died in the 80s, and he also did a lot of group dialogue. And his, this method of people-centered approach is basically relevant for any activity to accompany people who need help, whether in therapy, whether in mediation, coaching, facilitation, etc., etc. Mediation is my core skill, but I call myself a dialogue entrepreneur, I've been using my mediation skills mostly in a dialogue framework, whether you talk about intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue, or interconvictional dialogue, which is a term that is rising these days. As a mediator, I'm lucky enough to have intervened in many different contexts: family, neighborhood, schools, workplace, corporate mediation, restorative justice. So I'm not a specialist in any of those things, but this experience gave me a global and Unitarian vision of conflict and mediation. So that's what it inspires, my practice. So for me, the first thing that one has to ask oneself when trying to mediate conflicts between people, when trying to find the best ways to solve conflicts, is what is a conflict? And so I invite you, to ask yourselves that question: what is a conflict, and why does it exist? A lot of people, think of conflict as an opposition of will or interest, or a disagreement, some kind of confrontation with supposedly incompatible goals, right? The human needs theory talks a lot about the existence of basic human needs and the fact that conflict would come out of unmet needs. Nonviolent communication talks about the fact that we have bad communication, and that's why we get into conflicts. The negotiation approach, from basically coming from Harvard, considers that conflicts arise out of bad processes in negotiating different interests. So all those theories, I think, bring a piece of the truth to understand what conflict is. But in my opinion, they're not fully satisfactory. So one other thing that inspires a lot of my practice is the teachings of neuroscience. And so if you look at our brain, basically, you see that the way the brain is built is the way that follows the evolution of our species, right? So we first start with the reptilian brain, right, which is the part of the brain which is very, below the surface, very close to the spine, and basically deals with all the automatic, instinctive functions of our body, right? So it's blood circulation, it's heartbeats, it's digestion, it's breathing, all of the things that are really essential to our life, but that we do subconsciously. We don't control that. And then above that, you have the limbic brain, which is what others would call the emotional brain, which is basically where we stock most of our memory. And some would call it our hard drive, right? Which is where all our memories lie. And then on top of that, you have the neocortex, which basically makes our species special, right? It's something that we human beings have developed over the evolution to try to, analyze, to try to make sense of our world, to develop language, to imagine things as well. What's important to understand here is that all those parts of the brain function and interact together, but they don't interact in the same way. The reptilian brain acts very, very fast. It makes decisions extremely fast. The limbic brain is really our long-term memory, but the neocortex is something that also can act, but acts much more slowly than the rest of the brain. So that's something important to understand and remember when we think about how we function. Another important part of the brain, which is basically situated in the reptilian brain, is called the amygdala. And the amygdala has a very, very basic purpose. It's either quiet or activated. It's either on or off, right? If there's a danger, it gets activated. If there's no danger, it stays quiet, right? And so this is very important because every perception we have goes through that amygdala, right? Before going into our rational brain. So how does it work? We have a stimulus, so something that we perceive, something we smell, something we see, something we hear, and that information is going through the thalamus dispatching core, right, which is just a part of the brain which directs the information to the amygdala in the reptilian brain, and also to our neocortex, which is where we reason, right? And if the information is perceived as being a threat by the amygdala, by the reptilian brain, the amygdala will react right away. It will react in different ways. For some of you, you may be familiar with the three strategies of reacting to a threat, which is flight, fight, or freeze, right? We run away from the threat, or we fight back to try to suppress the threat, or we freeze, meaning we inhibit ourselves. We play dead, right? As a way to try to make the predator, for instance, think that we're not a threat ourselves, and so that the predator could go away. For instance, if you're an animal, this is also the three strategies here are used by animals as well. But what's important to remember here is that our amygdala will make us react in one of those ways much, much faster than what our rational brain will be able to make us do. In fact, neuroscientists have measured that the amygdala responds 30 times faster than the rational brain. So when we perceive something, if our amygdala is perceiving it as something that is not good for us, they will respond, for instance, with violence. And then our rational brain will be able to understand exactly what's going on and have a better assessment of the event and decide whether or not it's actually good to use violence or not. But that process will take much longer than what the amygdala enables us to do. So this is really, really important because we tend to place a lot of importance on our rationality, our able to reason, our ability to reason, but our instinctive, capabilities are much, much faster, and for good reason. Sometimes we don't have the time to analyze an event. Sometimes our instinct can save us from a threat. So that has there's a purpose to that. So going from this, for me, what works for me as a definition of conflict is that conflict is not just a disagreement, right? It's not just that. I can disagree with people. I don't necessarily have a conflict with them. If my relationship is good, I'm not going to want to, escalate or, fight or even run away from them. I can just have a simple conversation, right? So a conflict is not just a disagreement. It's a disagreement with some subjective, affective, and emotional elements. Basically, it's disagreement plus emotions, right? It's basically the body's instinctive mechanism for survival or for existence. The mere thing we need to do as human beings is the same thing that we need to do as living beings. Our main reason for being is to be. That's something that Henry Laborit, who was a famous neuroscientist in France, said. The only reason of a being is to be. And so conflicts is basically just an instinctive primal reptilian response to the perception of a threat. And the perception doesn't need to be right. It can be a wrong perception. It can be a fantasy. It can be a real, virtual, or potential threat. It doesn't matter. What matters is that our brain will take that perception as something threatening. And so that means that our emotions, our reptilian instinctive response, take over our reason. When we're in crisis, because of the threat, our reason just becomes irrelevant in a sense. It's our emotions that take over. And, in the animal realm, when when animals see a threat, it's usually a physical threat, right, from a predator. The tragedy of humanity is that we've developed many, many more reasons for feeling threatened. It can be a physical threat, but it can be also a symbolic threat, right? And the problem is that our brain is treating a physical threat exactly in the same way as it's treating a symbolic threat. It's basically treated as a death threat. So, when we get surprised by people having a conflict or reacting strongly to something that doesn't seem so important to us, just let's remember that for us, it doesn't constitute a threat, but for that person, it does. And why is that? It's because the reasons for conflict are very, very subjective. It depends on our perceptions. Our perceptions depend on the way we've developed, the way we've grown up, the experiences in life that we have gone through. The Weltanschauung, what the Germans would say, basically our vision of the world, which is more or less threatening given our life experience. If we've, grown up in a very secure environment with a lot of love, our amygdala will basically stay quiet most of the time. But if we have grown up in an environment where there's a lot of insecurity, a lot of physical threats all the time, or symbolic threats, and not a lot of love, then our amygdala will become more, agitated and more likely to react to events that are not necessarily really threatening, but that are perceived as such. Right? So the reasons for conflict are very, very subjective. And so, the theories that tend to try to understand conflict as something that comes out of predetermined reasons, like human needs theory, for instance, is not necessarily relevant because we don't always have the same needs, or we don't place as much importance on the same needs as other people. So there's no way for us, when we're mediating disputes, there's no way to know in advance what will create a conflict and what could solve it. It depends on the person, right? So that's very, very important to remember. So the person-centered approach is something that really responds to that. Carl Rogers was not a neuroscientist, but his practice of mediation and of accompaniment in general really fits well this understanding that when you're in crisis, it is emotions that take over. It's not the reason. So from that, there are several pitfalls that I think, happen a lot when trying to mediate disputes. The first pitfall is focusing on the problem, right? Because that's what happens. Parties come to you and they have a problem, right? And they want to solve that problem. But the problem is just a pretext. It's just something that parties want to focus on because that's what their instincts tells them to do. But the problem is not the problem. The pitfall in mediation is to try to focus on facts. Who did what, when, who said what to whom. And that's, I think, a pitfall. That's, I think, something that is not the right direction that you want to take if you want to really solve the conflict. Again, focusing on the solution. It's the same thing as focusing on the problem. Or placating our own vision and doing it for them, the savior syndrome. And let's face it, I, as a mediator, and I know it's the same for a lot of mediators, we came to that field because we have that instinct of, helping people, saving people. And it's understandable, but it's very important to try to check that and to try to introspect and try to reassess our motivations for doing this work. If you look at what typically happens in a mediation, you have party A and party B focusing on the problem. I want this cake. No, I want this cake. Or the wall on your property is actually infringing on my loan, and that's not right. So we're focusing on the problem. If the mediator focuses on the problem as well, then the problem becomes center. And the problem is, conflict is not about the problem, it's about the relationship, right? If party A and party B have a good relationship, the problem is not going to become a problem. There's something that they may disagree on, but if they have a good relationship, they will be able to tackle this problem and find a solution that suits them. If you focus on the problem, you're really going away from any chance of resolving a dispute, because the problem is not what causes conflict. A wall, a cake, an oil field, or whatever people or nations fight about is not actually what created the conflict. It's people who create the conflict, and it's really important to remember that. And that's why, for me, there's a lot of mediators that specialize in a specific field of mediation. Family mediation, or corporate mediation, or banking, or insurance mediation, etc. For me, it's a nonsense, because if you specialize in a field, it means that you have the intention to give your expertise to parties regarding a solution. But it's not your conflict; it's the party's conflict, and the problem is not really the problem. The parties are experts in their problem. The parties working in banking are experts in banking. You don't have to be the expert. What you need to be the expert on is relationship building and restoring. Carl Rogers said it's much more efficient to focus on the person than on the problem. And I really definitely agree with that. So a few principles of the person-centered approach is one, self-determination. Again, something really important to remember. A lot of people ask me, but how do you do to, mediate all those disputes and sleep at night? and I usually answer, look, those are not my conflicts. It's the people's conflict. I don't own them. I don't try to, take it for me in order to find a solution. In fact, that would be counterproductive. It's their problem. What I'm here to do is to support them to solve their problem themselves. And the person-centered approach considers something which is very important, which is that everyone has the resources to find their own solutions. Everyone has the capacities to find solutions to their own problems. And so, as a result, suggesting asking questions that try to probe for something or try to show that they should go into a specific direction, or giving advice is counterproductive, because the moment you do that, it means that you try to take the conflict away from them. And as a mediator, I really believe that what you're trying to do is not to disempower the participants or the parties. It's to actually empower them to own their problem really, and to have a better understanding of it, and to have a better understanding of the solutions that suit them. So focusing on the problem is useless. The relationship is most important. And relationships are made of people, and they all have unique experiences. So you need to listen to them. You cannot, it's not a mathematical exercise. You need to first listen and see what comes. And, again, and that's something that Carl Rogers understood even before the neurosciences really proved it. Emotions are the most important. When something important is a threat for me, it will trigger emotions. And emotions are really an important aspect and an important tool for you as mediators. It's a gateway to new information. And only after you acknowledge emotions can reason get back into control. And, don't get me wrong, reason is very, very important in our lives. And it's really important in trying to solve disputes. But if you really want to get reason back into control, you should definitely, avoid, you should first welcome emotions, and you should avoid calling for reason when reason is unable to, function. If we're in crisis, the reason is gone somewhere else. You first need to acknowledge the emotions if you want reason to get back. Another quote from Carl Rogers, every person who is normally constituted is able to find solutions that suit them. That's a paradigm. That's just a belief that he had. And I think it's very, very appropriate. And so if people and parties are fundamentally so autonomous, the role of the mediator should simply be to create the conditions for them to find their own solutions. And so how do you do that? There's a climate that Carl Rogers, advocated for, the person-centered approach climate. First is unconditional positive regard, or non-judgment. Basically, you're trying to be benevolent for the parties. You just here with an attitude that consists in welcoming them and welcoming their reality right here and right now, right? So, and that reality may change over time, but right here and right now in the mediation space, you welcome that reality, and you're not here to judge it. The third one is empathy, of course, feeling what the other person is feeling, not agreeing with that person, but feeling, trying to understand, trying to perceive the feelings that are going through that person. That's really important. The fourth condition is called congruence. Congruence or congruency is a mix of authenticity and adequacy. So as a mediator, it's also important to, be centered and be authentic with the other person. But at the same time, you try to adapt your responses to what the person in front of you, what the parties are actually feeling and going through, right? So it's a kind of a subtle principle here, but those four conditions are what create the person-centered approach. So in terms of the tools, here are the tools. All the tools that the mediators are using, I think, are here. First, what we call active listening, or what I would call integrative listening, which should be permanent all the time. You listen to the content of what they say, but you also listen to emotions. You listen to the underlying needs that are expressed, the doubts as well, the beliefs, the value system, whatever meaning they attach to whatever concept or word that they're using, their ideals, their goals in life and in this process of mediation. You also do reformulations, repeating their perceptions, repeating their feelings, their values, their ideals, etc., etc. And And the main thing that you do is to do regular mirrors on emotions, right? And I'm going to go back to that, but really acknowledge, welcome their emotions. And then occasionally you try to ask questions, but ask questions on feelings and perceptions, not on facts, right? Because if you ask questions on facts, that means that you're trying to play the role of a judge. You're trying to find the truth, but you're not here. That's not your mandate. Your mandate as a mediator is to try to understand what their truths are, not what the truth is. And of course, you try to do summaries, synthesis on what have been expressed, trying to surface what really is underlying, the values, the needs, the meaning. And also silences. Silences are also important. It's if you show that you're able to stay silent in a mediation, that shows that you're trusting them to come up with whatever needs to be said at that very moment. Okay, so let's. I want to just take a look at certain tools like the mirrors for mirroring emotions. That has to do with emotional intelligence, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. If you look at the construction of the word emotion, it's emotion, right? So it's a movement towards the outside. So it means that something important is at stake here, right? Something is coming out. Something is important is happening, and it's trying to be expressed, right? I'm giving you I'm expressing something through my emotions, so it can be ignored. And it's important to also remember that if you remember the drawing that I showed you of the brain, the limbic brain, what I said is that it's our hard drive. It's where we stock all our memories. And it's interesting to understand also that something that neuroscientists have discovered some time ago is that any memory we have has an attached marker to it. And the marker is an emotional marker. So emotions also serve as engraving memories in our hard drive. There cannot be a memory if there's no emotion attached to it, right? So when emotions come out, they are attached to a memory. And those emotions will be a key, a gateway to understanding what exactly in the person at that moment, in that space, is at stake. So emotions are really, really important. Leaving emotions aside is the biggest mistake we make. And it's not just in mediation, but everywhere. In the workplace, we try to, we tell people to check their emotions at the door. I think it's a big, big mistake. If you think about it, if you've been angry at something, something made you angry, and someone comes to you and say, no, calm down. What are you likely to do? Are you likely to calm down, or are you likely to get even more angry? You're likely to get even more angry. That's what happens to me, and that's what happens to most of the people I know. And there's a reason for that. If you're angry at something, you have a reason for it. You have your own reason. Maybe it's not relevant reason for other people, but that's relevant for you. And if someone comes to you and say, no, suppress your emotions, don't show your emotions, it's very violent, because something in you is telling you that something is at threat, that your life is at threat. Remember, the brain processes those information as a life threat, whatever it is. So if someone tells you, no, don't defend yourself, it's okay. You might be in danger, but that's okay. It's very violent. So you're not going to do that. So what you do in mediation is you try to observe the physical manifestations of emotion, because emotions are not intellectual, they're physical. That translate physically into your body. Recognize those emotions and reflect those emotions verbally, right? And so you can say something like, I'm sensing, anger. I'm feeling frustration in what you say, or I can see that you're, upset about this, or you're sad, or you're feeling anxious about what the other person is saying. Those ways of just acknowledging the emotions that are being expressed. And that has several effects. It shows that you're aware of their suffering, which is great, because when you go into mediation and you have a conflict, the other person is not able to hear you. So we expect the mediator to be able to hear that person, right? So you show them that you're aware of their suffering, that you're listening to them. You also make them aware of their own emotions. When we get angry, we are not necessarily aware that that we're going through certain emotions. So having someone in front of me saying, "Hey, I'm feeling some anger here," and it may not be exactly the right word. It may not be exactly anger that I'm feeling, but maybe I'm feeling, slightly, I don't know, irritated. And so I'll say, "Yeah, I'm not angry, but I'm irritated." And that very mirror that the mediator will have done for me will help me actually identify what precise emotion I'm going through, and that will help me understand where maybe that emotion is coming from. And having that emotion acknowledged will in turn help me be in a better disposition to hear the emotions of the other person. So it's a virtuous circle that you're trying to do here through your active listening. And then you can ask questions, of course, but questions again not on facts. Ask questions to better understand what is the reality in the person, not the reality in general. So questions about feelings, about meanings, about what does that piece of cake, what does that wall represent to you? It's not the wall itself, it's not the cake itself, it's what it represents for me in that moment. What are your perceptions, etc. What meanings do you attach to that conversation? And I'm sorry if you hear my daughter right now, but I couldn't. There's no daycare today. And then now, just to give you a word about the mediation process, according to that, it's a very minimalistic approach to mediation. You welcome the parties, you explain the process, you give a few ground rules, you ask participants also what ground rules they want to adopt for themselves, and then you hear their stories, and then you give a synthesis of what you heard, and you give a lot of mirrors, again about the feelings, and then you allow for an informal discussion, allow for chaos. It's okay if they yell at each other for some time, but through your active listening, your integrative listening, that discussion will likely become calmer and calmer as parties, feel heard, basically. Do mirrors, do a lot of synthesis, recap, re-explain what you heard, etc., etc. And then progressively, what you're trying to do in mediation or in dialogue is you try to look for a transcultural encounter, right? Everybody has a different culture. Everybody has a different worldview. And you're not trying to help them change their culture or their worldview. You're not trying in mediation to have them change their mind. You're trying to help them find a way to create a meta culture or a meta sort of identity that will work for them to solve their own problems. So that's my sort of approach to mediation, which is really inspired by Carl Rogers. I want to finish by evoking an issue that is, I think, going to become more and more acute as we progress. And I think that it's a question that is going to be asked to mediators more and more. What can mediation do in situations of power asymmetry? And, it's a fair question. And there's no easy and definitive answer to that question. But I wanted to give you a few of my reflections on this. The reason why more and more people ask this question about, well, what can mediation do when there's so much power imbalance, is that there is this concept attached to mediation, which is the neutrality aspect of the mediator. How can you be neutral when there's clearly an oppressor and a victim, for instance? I've done a lot of mediation in the criminal system, as restorative justice mechanism, and there is a possibility to use mediation for conflicts that are asymmetric. So just to talk about neutrality for a moment, neutrality is a relevant concept because you have this notion of balance and this notion of non-judgment. But at the same time, neutrality, first, it doesn't really exist, right? Nobody is neutral. We all have opinions. But the problem also is that it means that you don't have any emotional investment. You're trying to be a robot in mediation, and that doesn't work. mediators are fundamentally human beings, and they should not pretend to be robots. And the neutrality aspect is, the problem is also that you don't give any support to either of the parties. And so I don't think that is really a good thing to do. Now, another concept which I use both for mediation and for dialogue facilitation, intercultural dialogue, is the concept of multipartiality or omnipartiality. So when you think about the concept of partiality, being partial doesn't mean that you agree. It means that, at least in mediation, it means that you're leaning towards, it means that you're trying to support the person, right? Not necessarily agree with what they say, and it's not about agreeing. It's about supporting the person as a person, whatever they say. Believing that that person has an inherent dignity and needs and deserves to be supported, to express themselves and to hear the other as well. So it's giving my energy equally to everyone, right? Supporting them to express themselves and to hear others. So in a sense, you could say that the mediator is neutral regarding the outcome of the process, but he will be multipartial regarding the process itself. And the concept of omnipartiality means that it's not just you're not just partial to the parties at the table or to the participants in a dialogue, but you're also trying to be partial to other people who may not be at the table but still have a stake. The society in general, the environment, human rights. Mediators, I think, are partial to human rights as well. And so, to the question, can that concept of multipartiality help you be sensitive and factor in unequal power in mediation? I think yes. I think that in any mediation, there's always a power imbalance. No relationship is completely balanced in power. It doesn't exist. But still, you can work with those persons. Multipartiality actually implies that you acknowledge power dynamics. You don't just acknowledge emotions and what the person say. You also acknowledge the power imbalance that are being displayed. Multipartiality also implies that you put limits to violence, right? You don't just let people, be violent verbally and even less physically with each other. You try to put an end to that, because if you don't, then it will prevent you from being multipartial, right? It means that you support everyone to be themselves, and that means that violence should not be tolerated, right? But the goal of your goal as a mediator is to actually, again, empower the participants to correct themselves whatever power imbalances may happen in their relationship. So it always comes down to, for me, the person-centered approach to mediation always comes down to this primary role of the mediator or facilitator to reflect the things that parties express, the discourses, the emotions, the interactions. And if you reflect that, that will empower them to restore a healthy relationship. But, just to finish, when you do see that power imbalance, and then when that power imbalance is really acute, one thing you can do is, do a reality check. Ask the weaker party, is this solution that something that you can afford? Is it something that you really can live with? And to the stronger party, is this solution going to be sustainable for you? What if the other party eventually doesn't agree with it anymore because it's not sustainable, because it's not something that they can live with? Or another thing that you can do is to, not giving your advice yourself, but suggest the person to see someone else who could be helpful, whether it be a lawyer or a therapist or a social worker. You're only mediator here, so you should not get out of that mandate. But you can refer mediatees or parties to other professionals who could be helpful. But at the end of the day, if power dynamics are so high that all the strategies don't work, and you still see someone who's clearly dominating the other person, you have to stop the process, because it means that you won't be able to continue the process with what you have. Remember to keep your mandate in mind. You're not a judge, you're not a therapist, you're not a policeman or policewoman. You're just here to help them find solutions to their own conflict. And if that doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. Mediation doesn't always work. Let's be clear. So you also need to be humble enough to understand when you're not able to do your job anymore. So again, just to recap, the important things to remember if you're trying to practice person-centered mediation is don't focus on the problem or on facts. Don't rush into problem solving. This is something that we all tend to do. People come to us, they have a problem. We want to solve their problem for them. But remember that it's not necessarily the best way to do that. Accompany them, facilitate their own change, empower them. The biggest effect of conflict is that people feel disempowered. The biggest help you can give them is to re-empower them. And obviously, don't placate your own interpretation or prescription, because you may have an understanding of their conflict, but you don't. Only they have an understanding of what it really is at stake for them. And you're only here to help them realize that. Focus on relationship, trust the persons to find their own solution, welcome, acknowledge emotions, help them find what's at stake, and be aware of the context in terms of power dynamics as well. And, trust the parties to restore their relationship. And if it doesn't work, then you need to stop the mediation process. It's as simple as that. And it's, again, that's why, when people ask me, like, how do you cope with all this? I ask them, look, I cope because I have a clear, method and ethical principles that, just enable me to be really helpful, but without taking something that's not mine, and on the contrary, giving back the commands and the ability of the parties to reason and to find a good solution for them by acknowledging their emotions first and by empowering them to really have a better understanding of what's being at play for them and for the other party. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say today. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Mr. Rafael. It was really informative. We really appreciate the way you develop your presentation, starting from the neuroscience background, focusing on the person-centered approach, and then the last consideration about emotions and how to cope with emotional intelligence. So again, thank you very much. You explain us to address a lot of questions in mediation. Now we do have a lot for you. Unfortunately, they are not about feelings, but facts. And we can start from the first one, that is how to switch the problem to the relationship, as the parts always go back to that.
It's not something that you do just by asking a question. People focus on the problem, yes. If parties want to focus on the problem, just reflect that. Okay, you want to focus on the problem. Okay, this issue here is very important for you, and progressively try to ask questions about that, help them again understand why is it so important for them. It's always the why behind the what. I want this. Okay, you want this. Yes, you want this, and I understand that. I hear that, but if you really progressively try to ask them exactly what is at stake, what is that, what is the meaning of that thing, what is the importance of that thing, what does this conflict remind them of? You're not trying to be a therapist, but you're trying to just dig deeper. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the iceberg model. This what's above the surface, which are the positions, what I want, what I say I want, and then below the surface is a lot of information that are hidden from the process, which is the values, the needs, the emotions, the ideals, what's really important for me. It's not there. So if you as a mediator try to dig deeper and try to elicit that information, then that's where the relationship will be able to become the center of the conversation, because it's about the persons. It's about what they are, what they see, what they feel, what they've experienced in life. And it's not about the problem itself. And so progressively, it's something that each party will become aware for themselves. And the other party will also become aware of that as we progress in the conversation. It's about helping them connect with each other on a deeper level, and not through the problem. If they try to connect through the problem, they won't be able to connect. They will only be able to connect through things that they can relate to. Again, the needs, the values, all the things that make us human, and that that we share with other human beings.
Thank you. And another one is, will mediation be brought again if both parties had reached to a solution previously, but they started disputing again?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes. Will mediation be brought again if both parties had reached to a solution previously, but they started disputing again?
Sure. I mean, mediation can happen at any point. And if you mediated a dispute and you felt like it was resolved, and then the parties come back to you for the same exact reasons, then maybe it means that the process was not exactly right, or that the solution that came up was not appropriate. And ask yourself again. Most of the time, in my experience, most of the time people come back to mediation or just continue with their conflicts just because the solution that they took away was not exactly something that they came up with, that they elaborated, but something that maybe the mediator pushed for, even subtly, but maybe the mediator pushed for that. And it's something that a lot of mediators do. It's, in my opinion, something that conciliators could do, but mediators should stay away from. But it's something that we all tend to, try to do if we see a problem, we see a conflict, and we have an idea of how they should solve it. And it's very difficult to get rid of that idea. And so we will try to push in different ways, maybe sometimes in manipulative ways, for the solution that we have in mind. But the problem is, even if it's the right solution, the fact that the solution doesn't come organically from the parties will make it less sustainable. And so that's why people will go back to their disputes.
Wow, thank you. Another one is, would you believe that increasing emotional intelligence could lead to potential decrease in conflicts?
Absolutely. Because emotions are what cause conflict. Again, it's not disagreement. It's about understanding what drives us. And, we are emotional beings. We'd like to think that we're rational beings. We're not. We're rationalizing beings. Meaning we placate rational reasoning onto instinctive behavior. But what drives us is not really our reason most of the time, and especially in a crisis situation, meaning when we have a conflict, when we are confronting ourselves with someone who is provoking that feeling of being threatened. The threat feeling is, can only be addressed through emotional intelligence. And so emotional intelligence is about, understanding the primary role of emotions, understanding how emotions can manifest themselves, welcoming and being okay with the existence of emotions in a relationship, and acknowledging them and helping each other to understand where they come from. Again, emotions are expressing something. It's natural. We were made that way. So yes, I think emotional intelligence is the main tool, more than nonviolent communication, for instance. Nonviolent communication is a great tool as well. But emotional intelligence is, I think, way more important and essential if you're trying to decrease escalation.
Okay, thank you. And a person asked how to know both parties' emotions and how to wisely adjust yourself with them. Can you share a case or scenario for that? So the question is how to know the parties' emotions and how to adjust yourself with them.
Look, emotions, we all have emotions. We don't always express emotions in the same way according to our different cultures. That's true. But most of the time, emotions are so universal that, even when, mediating disputes with with people from cultures that were quite different from mine, there's a way you can detect emotions. Emotions have physical manifestations. So one thing you can do if you're not sure about the emotion is that you can just reflect what you're seeing physically in the person. So for instance, if someone is using their hands like this and really showing a lot of tension, you can say, oh, I can see that you're playing with your hands or whatever it is, or I can see that you're crying right now. And crying could be about different things, or it seems like you're breathing in a loud manner right now. That can be a sign of an emotion, right? So what you're doing here is you're mirroring the emotion without naming the emotion. You're just naming the physical manifestations of it. And by doing that, the person will then be able to connect to that emotional level of their attitudes, and they will be able themselves to understand what emotion to take consciousness of the emotions that they're going through. Also, if you're naming an emotion, again, I think I said earlier, if you're naming an emotion and you're naming anger, for instance, there was one day where I mediated a dispute, and I saw a man who was very, very angry, and I said, I see you're very angry right now. And the person said, no, I'm not angry. And I'm just very irritated right now. And I said, okay, that's fine. You're just very irritated. You're not angry. But that's the main effect of that, is not that you're trying to detect the exact emotion, is that you're inviting the person to connect with their emotions. So you're just proposing something. You're just proposing the emotion that you're perceiving, but you might be wrong. The value of this is just to help and invite the person to say, hey, you have emotions. They matter. They will tell you something. Tell us about it.
Very interesting. So thank you. So the last question is referred to a specific case. So when mediators try to strengthen the weaker party, and the question is, doesn't the mediator become judgmental by deciding who is weaker and who is stronger?
Well, that's the thing. You're not. It's not for you to decide that. Yes, you may have an idea. Of course, again, mediating doesn't mean you turn your brain off. You perceive things, and usually when there's a clear domination or abuse, you will see it. At the same time, it's not for you to say, hey, there's abuse here, or unless it comes directly in the mediation. Of course, you have certain ground rules that you need to keep, but it's not for you to decide, there's a clear domination here, and I don't want to let that happen. But so you have that perception, keep it on one side of your mind, and then continue with your process. And then again, you shouldn't show that sort of assessment that you're making about power imbalance in front of the two mediatees. But what you can do is do caucuses. Take the mediatees aside and again do a reality check with them. How is it going for you? Are you sure this is a fair process for you? Just check with them. And if at some point you really have the impression that for instance, the weaker party is saying that everything is fine, but really it's not fine, it's up for you also to say at some point, look, I'm not able to continue my mediation anymore. Just say that. You should never step out of your role as a mediator. You should never judge someone, but you can say, look, I'm not useful anymore. I cannot do this anymore. And it's fine. It's about congruency as well. Be authentic. If you feel that there's a situation that you cannot tolerate because of ethics, because of justice, just stop there. And again, refer them to other professionals who could be more helpful and who have the authority and ability to judge and to assess and to take party. But your role as a mediator should stay multi-partial, and so you should refrain from showing at least that you're judging them.
Thank you so much, Rafa. Your answers were so insightful, and there has been some great interaction, I would say. I'm sure all the participants are very grateful for your presentation and explanations, and I hope to have you with us soon again. So really thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I'm glad you have all enjoyed the session. We can read your nice comments right now. And please remember to fill in the feedback form to receive your e-certificate. And if you like our events, webinar, workshop, follow us. And we are on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram. We do have also a WhatsApp group for the latest updates. So Rafael, thank you again. I wish you to have a great rest of your day, and bye-bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.